Make your best palette for your art. We've done a lot of color theory. I've made a few palettes for you along the way. It's time for you to make your own palette and learn a few tricks for putting together the best palette possible. Let's take a look at more color picker choices and how to use it effectively to make your own colors. We found there are two sets of primary colors, red, green, blue, and red, yellow, blue. Roughly speaking, digital illustration for video, app development, and web design will use RGB, while traditional art techniques use RYB. We learned you could find colors that work together two ways. One is by complements. A selected hue works well with the hue on the opposite side of the color wheel. You can also use contrast. Dark colors of the same hue work well with bright colors, for example. Now let's take this to the next level. We can look at more schemes using the Harmony tab of the color picker. The Harmony picker is an RGB picker, so I tend not to use it as much as the disc. However, what you learn here can be applied to the disc. Open the picker and select the Harmony tab. And select red for your color on your palette. Now we're going to make sure we're in the complement mode here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit where it says that word underneath colors. If it says complementary, you're already good to go. If not, hit that word, hit complementary, and it'll move the circles around to something like this. You'll have a big red dot and a smaller cyan dot showing the complement of red. For Harmony, saturation decreases as you move towards the center of the slider. So I can move it in like this, for example. Brightness is a slider underneath the circle. You'll notice as I move that large dot, the small dot moves too. In Harmony, the complement matches the saturation and brightness of your selected color. If I want to use the complement, tap the small circle, and the color changes in my selector. A good guideline about colors is pick colors as different from other colors as possible. If you were to pick 3 colors on a color wheel, you'd get a triad, equally spaced colors on the circle. So for example, I'm going to hit the complementary here, and you can get triads from this. Hit the triadic button. Go ahead and hit red again so we get some nice simple colors. And we'll have our primary colors of red, green, and blue. Now tapping orange on my palette gives us a different set of colors. And I can do that again with blue, for example. And it moves things around. I can move the big circle, and that'll make them equidistant. And again, I can change my saturation here if I want to get this. And it'll give me different saturations. All right, now let's go try tetradic here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to hit triadic, and then I'll hit tetradic. And that's 4 colors. I'll hit red again so we go back to our starting position here. And you'll get 4 colors equally spaced. Now this is about the limit of color palette for hues. More than 4 hues start to muddy a work. Using the fewest hues possible keeps your colors bright. Now there's 2 more ways of organizing colors here. I'm going to go ahead and change over here again, and I'm going to pick the split complementary here. This is a triad, but with 2 colors equally distant from the complement. So the 2 colors tend towards cyan, but are green and blue. I tend to use triads and split complements often. Now let's go change over here to analogous, which are 3 hues close together. Instead of spacing from the complement, this is spacing from the root color. For colorblind people like myself, some ranges are near impossible to use as colors start to blend together. For example, let me move to a green root color here. And all 3 colors are the same to me. And it's pretty close to the same deal here with magenta. If I go to magenta here, I've got purple here, but that'll work here. But if I move this up to magenta, like so, I start having problems. This one has a little bit more of the red dark, will be okay. But the greens are going to be absolutely a nightmare for some people. So on the other hand, I am really big about these orange yellows. So I will be really hanging out over here somewhere because I use those a lot. Usually a little bit more on this angle over here, something like that. Is one of my favorite palettes, plus a complement. And we're going to talk about that in a second. If you're using RGB, you can use this harmony to get good color suggestions easily. And as I've done here, explain what these color harmonies are. If you're using RYB colors on the disk, you can use the same ideas to make your own color harmonies and store them in a palette. Let's make up a new custom palette for this. Now I'm going to go ahead and tap on the Palettes tab in the color picker, and I'm going to make a 4-hue palette. Like I just said, I like to use what I refer to as a split complement with the complement included. So we're going to use that as my example. For traditional art techniques, I'll use contrast and saturation and brightness even if I'm not changing hue. So I find it easier to use the disk for making and using these palettes. My usual strategy for this is to select my pure hues, then I'll add variation of the pure hues along with those. So first step is go to the palettes and get a new palette. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the add button here and create new palette. I'll tap on the name here, and I'm going to call it Steve's Colors. I'll check the menu and make sure this is the default palette. And since I don't see default palette here, then it is definitely the default palette, and we've got a check mark next to it to prove that's the case. So I'll tap out of that. Go to values. I use values first to make sure I get the right brightness and saturation on my first couple of colors. So in the hue, saturation, brightness, I'm going to set the hue here to 200. And I have a saturation and brightness of 100% on both of those, so that's perfect. Okay, and that's going to be my first color here. Okay, and the palette is a matrix of 10 columns by 3 rows. I like to get my full saturation hues so they're a little easier to tap, especially if I'm using my fingers to draw. So I'm going to make 2 squares for everything here, and I'm going to make this my first set of squares here. So I'm going to tap on the 2 squares right on the left side in the middle, like that. That way the ones on the top can be one of my variations on the hue, and the one on the bottom can be a variation. Probably I'll put the light one on top and the dark one on the bottom. You can make more than this, but I just happen to make my palette as small as possible if I can do it. Okay, so now I've got a blue-green that I've got done. Now I'm going to go over the color disk, and I can start making colors from this. And again, I'm going to do this very roughly. You could be really technically careful with all of this, but I find particularly for what we do in the art world versus what's going on in the graphic illustration world, you don't have to be so careful. And so I'm just going to roughly pick out where the complement of this color is. And so I'm just going to go right above to the top here, and I'll pick there, which looks close to where I want to be. It's somewhere in an orange range. So I'm going to use that orange as my next color, and I'm going to put that one in. And then I'm going to pick 2 more colors, which are going to be my analog colors, or essentially making a split complementary, depending on the way you want to look at it. Now, usually it's kind of been close together on this. I tend to spread them out a little bit, which is a perfectly good thing. You can spread out that type of thing here if you want to do split complementary a little further out. It'll definitely make the colors a lot more contrasting. So I'm going to pick one right over here and get some kind of yellow. And let me go back over here again. And I'm going to do that again. I'm going to guess over here, probably somewhere in the reds, is going to be my last color. Now these 2 split complementaries, I tend not to use as much as I will use those 2 complements. So I'll be using the blue, green, and the orange most of all. And I'll use these more for tonal values than anything else. Okay, and for the most part, I'm picking an orange as this, and it's going to just pretty much range around the orange and then take the blue-green as shadow colors. And we'll see how that works in a little bit. As we've been working, you've noticed how I've used a complement to make the shadow colors. All right, so we've got that done. Now I can start playing around with these. I'm going to go back over here to blue-green and show you what I do. I'm going to put some colors on top. For simplicity, I'm going to use only 2 colors for this. I'll make 1 light and 1 dark color. You can make up to 4 on this one, but I'm going to just do it this way for ease of instruction. And I tend to pick one that is a high brightness, with some saturation. So somewhere around there is where I like to be. Okay, and then I'll put that color in here, and then I'll do the same thing with a higher saturation and a high darkness. So we'll put the darkness will be over here somewhere. I like to put something over in this part of the world as my dark color, like that. Okay, and then I'll do that for all the other ones. And that gets us our basic palette set of colors. Again, you could make up to 4 colors here, so you could put other variations in here. So I might put one like over here, a high brightness, high saturation, instead of the low saturation I have over here for the white. But what I will do is, particularly on these 2 colors here, the orange and the blue-green, my 2 complements, I'm going to make one more dark color, and that'll be my drawing colors. And if I really need a dark on here. So I'm going to set this one about 50% saturation and about there. Okay. Now this might look familiar because those are where I get the colors that I did in the monochrome section. That's exactly what I did, is I took those complements that I'm going to be using and stuck them in dark colors into my palette. So I've got those 2, and I'll pick this one and do the same thing. And those are going to work with anything if I need a really, really dark color in here. And so I can use those dark colors as well. Again, I use them a lot for drawing. The last color I like to have is just pure white, since I don't really have a pure white. And I'm going to go over here to value to do that. And I'm just going to move all my RGB sliders all the way up so that that's a pure white. And it's useful to have a pure white in there, particularly for masking purposes, and so I'm going to leave that pure white in there. Sometimes I'll even do the pure black in there, and I'm going to replace one of these colors, so I'll hold it down and then set current color, and so I have those 2 colors handy if I need them for masking purposes, which we'll talk more about masks in a future video. So that looks like a pretty good set of colors. So let's go ahead and take a brush and play with these. So I'm going to take my orange here, and I've got a soft pastel already set, and I can put a color in here, and there you go. And then I can just start using some colors. So I'm going to use I'll use a darker blue-green down on this, and you can see how that works. And so that dark color works really well with that. And I can do, let's say, a lighter yellow as a highlight on this. And you can see how those things start to work, and you can start blending them together as well, because they'll all blend well together. I mean, you can go to the markers, and most of the markers will now work well with this. So if you go to inking marker, okay, again, let's pull up my opacity a little bit on this one. Okay, so we've got a color here, and all of these, this one, and this one, are all colors that are going to be analogous, and analogous colors work well with markers. So you'll start to see decent coloring with that, but if I go over here to my contrast color, you'll see that that starts to darken things up. So it works also very well with the markers. So that's what I wanted to do, is show you how those palettes work, and those work very well with most of the tools that we've learned so far. So for your challenge, go make yourself a palette using some colors you like. Everyone has their palette, and that might change due to the work or mood of the artist. I change my palette depending if I'm doing a landscape or a person. So make a few, see which one works best for you. In our next episode, we'll look more at how Procreate layers can help you use color effectively. So hit subscribe to make sure you get all of the upcoming episodes.